The star-speckled void around Rovia Prime sparkled with the deadly ballet of interstellar warfare. Against the backdrop of the gas giant's swirling amber clouds, the Galactic Alliance fleet had positioned itself in what should have been a routine training exercise. Instead, the training vessel, Aegis, found itself caught in the crosshairs of an actual Cadet forward operating base, its defensive shields crackling with barely contained energy as plasma bolts streaked through space like angry fireflies. Cadet Alara Voss pressed her face against the observation deck's reinforced viewport, watching the light show with a mixture of awe and terror. At 22, she was in her second year at the Galactic Armored Academy, and this was supposed to be her final training cruise before graduation. The irony wasn't lost on her that what began as an academic exercise in fleet maneuvers had suddenly become very, very real. "All hands, this is Captain Morrison." The ship's intercom crackled to life. "We have encountered an active Cadet defensive installation. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Alara's stomach dropped. The Cadet Alliance had been expanding aggressively into this sector for months, but intelligence had indicated this particular system was still contested territory. Apparently, intelligence had been wrong. The Aegis shuddered as another energy blast found its mark against the deflector shields. Emergency lighting bathed the corridors in an ominous red glow as Alara made her way to the command deck, her magnetic boots clanking against the metal flooring with each step. Around her, her fellow cadets moved with the controlled panic of people who had trained for this moment but never quite believed it would actually happen. "Voss." Lieutenant Commander Reeves spotted her as she entered the command center. "Get to communications. We're trying to establish contact with the Cadet installation." Alara slipped into the communications station, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface with practiced efficiency. The static-filled transmission came through almost immediately, and the voice that emerged was deep, confident, and utterly without mercy. "Galactic Alliance vessel, this is General Vorin Cadet of the Cadet Forward Command. You have violated our territorial space and engaged our defensive systems. Your navigation is compromised, your shields are failing, and you are outgunned. Surrender immediately, and your crew will be treated according to the protocols of war." The transmission cut off, leaving the command deck in stunned silence. Alara looked around at her fellow cadets and the handful of instructors who comprised the Aegis skeleton crew. They were barely 24 people, most of them students facing down what appeared to be a fully operational military installation. "Options?" Captain Morrison asked, his voice steady despite the gravity of their situation. "Sir," Ensign Rodriguez spoke up from the tactical station. "Our main engines are offline. Navigation is down to backup systems only. We're running on emergency power." "And their defensive capabilities?" "Unknown, sir. The energy readings suggest they've got at least a dozen heavy plasma cannons, plus what looks like a new generation point defense system we haven't seen before." Alara studied the tactical readout, her mind racing. Something about the defensive pattern seemed familiar, like a puzzle she'd worked on in Professor Yamamoto's asymmetric warfare course. The Cadet were known for their overwhelming firepower and direct assault tactics, but this installation seemed different somehow. "Sir," she said, raising her hand tentatively, "request permission to analyze their defensive grid in more detail." Captain Morrison looked at her with surprise. "Cadet, this isn't a classroom exercise." "I understand that, sir, but I think there might be something we're missing." The captain hesitated, then nodded. 2 minutes, Voss. That's all we have before they start shooting again." Alara's fingers flew across the sensor controls overlaying different spectral analyses and energy signature readings. There, buried in the technical data, she found what she was looking for. The point defense system was operating on a different frequency pattern than the main weapons, and the energy consumption curves suggested it was still in its testing phase. "Sir," she said, her voice gaining confidence, "I think their new defense system isn't fully operational yet. Look at these power fluctuations. They're cycling the point defense grid every 47 seconds for system diagnostics. Lieutenant Commander Reeves moved to look over her shoulder. You're saying there's a gap in their coverage? More than that, sir. I think there's a way to exploit it. The ship shuddered again as the Cadet installation fired another warning shot. Captain Morrison's expression was grim. Explain, Cadet, quickly. Alara took a deep breath. The gap in their point defense creates a window where we could deploy signal drones to create false targeting data. If we could coordinate that with a focused electromagnetic pulse from our remaining power reserves, we might be able to blind their sensors long enough to... To what, Cadet? Captain Morrison's voice held a note of desperation. We're a training vessel. We don't have the firepower to take on a military installation. We don't need firepower, sir. We need to think like students, not soldiers. The command deck fell silent, except for the hum of the ship's emergency systems. Everyone was looking at her now, and Alara felt the weight of their attention like a physical force. The Cadet expect us to either surrender or fight conventionally, she continued. They're not expecting an academic approach. Professor Yamamoto always said that the most powerful weapon in asymmetric warfare is the one your enemy doesn't know you have. And what weapon would that be? Captain Morrison asked. Knowledge, sir. And the fact that they think we're just students. Before anyone could respond, the communications system crackled back to life. General Couture's voice filled the command center even more imperious than before. Alliance vessel, your time is up. Surrender now, or we will open fire with full force. Captain Morrison looked around the room at the faces of his crew, most of them barely out of their teens, all of them looking to him for leadership in a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond anyone's control. Sir, Alara said quietly, let me talk to him. Cadet, that's not... Please, sir, trust me. Something in her voice must have convinced him, because Captain Morrison stepped back and gestured toward the communications console. Alara took a deep breath and opened the channel. General Couture, this is Cadet Alara Voss of the Galactic Alliance vessel, Aegis. We acknowledge your superior firepower and tactical position. A pause. Then Couture's voice returned, tinged with what might have been amusement. A cadet! They send children to negotiate surrender terms. Not to negotiate, sir, to learn. Learn what exactly? How a superior military commander handles an asymmetric engagement. Alara was improvising now, but she could sense something shifting in the general's tone. The Couture prided themselves on military excellence and tactical superiority. She was betting that Couture's ego would be intrigued by the prospect of demonstrating that superiority to a student. You wish to observe our tactics before your surrender. If you would permit it, sir. It would be an honor to witness Couture military doctrine in action. Another pause, longer this time. Around the command deck, her fellow cadets were staring at her, with expressions ranging from admiration to complete bewilderment. Very well, Cadet. You have 5 minutes to observe our preliminary bombardment procedures. Use them wisely. The transmission cut off, and the immediate crisis seemed to ease slightly. Captain Morrison looked at her with a mixture of pride and concern. Cadet Voss, what exactly are you planning? Sir, I need to speak with Lieutenant Mara Sullivan from the engineering section and Ensign Jax Harrow from the pilot corps. And if Dr. Leon, sir, is available, I'd like her psychological warfare expertise. Voss, we don't have time for a study group. Sir, with respect, that's exactly what we need. The Couture are expecting us to act like soldiers. But we're not soldiers. We're students. And students have tools that soldiers don't. Lieutenant Commander Reeves was already moving toward the internal communications panel. I'll get your people up here, Cadet. But you'd better have a damn good plan. Within minutes, Alara found herself huddled with 3 other cadets in the corner of the command deck, their voices low as she outlined her idea. Lieutenant Mara Sullivan, a specialist in encryption and electronic warfare, listened with growing excitement as Alara explained the technical aspects of her plan. You want to turn our academic equipment into weapons? Mara asked. Not weapons, tools. We have signal analysis drones that we use for communications research. We have electromagnetic pulse generators that we use for studying stellar phenomena. We have holographic projection systems for tactical simulations. Ensign Jax Harrow, who had been quietly running calculations on his personal tablet, looked up with a grin. If we could coordinate the signal drones to create false targeting signatures, while using the EMP generators to disrupt their sensor arrays, we could effectively blind them, Mara finished. At least temporarily. Dr. Leon Sir, the ship's psychological warfare instructor, had been listening intently. And, psychologically, they won't be expecting an attack at all. You've positioned us as surrendering students. They'll be in observation mode, not combat readiness. Exactly, Alara said. The question is, can we actually pull it off? The next few minutes were a flurry of activity as the small team coordinated their improvised plan. Mara worked with the engineering section to reprogram the signal drones, while Jax calculated trajectory patterns that would maximize their effectiveness. Dr. Ser helped Alara refine the psychological aspects of their approach, ensuring that their communications with Kator would maintain the illusion of compliance while they prepared their strike. Sir Alara called out to Captain Morrison, requesting permission to deploy academic research drones for observational purposes, as discussed with General Kator. The captain looked skeptical, but nodded. Permission granted, Cadet. Just remember this isn't a simulation anymore. Understood, sir. The first phase of their plan went smoothly. The signal drones launched from the Aegis, with minimal energy signatures appearing on Kator sensors, as nothing more than passive observation equipment. Alara maintained sporadic communication with General Kator, asking seemingly innocent questions about Kator tactical doctrine, while her teammates positioned their makeshift weapons. General, she said over the open channel, our tactical professors would be fascinated by your point defense coordination. The energy patterns are unlike anything we've studied. Your instructors should learn from this demonstration, Cadet. Kator defensive systems represent the pinnacle of military engineering. The cycling frequency is particularly impressive, sir. Every 47 seconds like clockwork. Alara held her breath, hoping that Kator wouldn't realize she had just revealed that she'd been studying their defensive patterns in detail. But the general's response suggested that he interpreted her comment as student admiration rather than tactical analysis. Precision and predictability are hallmarks of superior military discipline, Cadet. Indeed, sir. Across the command deck, Mara caught Alara's eye and nodded. The signal drones were in position, ready to begin transmitting false targeting data on her command. Jax had calculated the optimal timing for their electromagnetic pulse, designed to coincide with the natural gap in Kator's point defense cycle. General Kator, Alara said, we're ready to begin our formal surrender procedures as befits proper military protocol. Excellent, Cadet. Lower your shields and prepare to receive our boarding party. Lowering shields now, sir. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, when Alara tried to reconstruct the sequence of events, she could only remember fragments, the brilliant flash, as their improvised electromagnetic pulse disrupted Kator's sensor array. The confusion in General Kator's voice, as false targeting signatures suddenly appeared throughout his defensive perimeter. The satisfying crackle as the station's point defense system went offline. Its diagnostic cycle interrupted at precisely the worst possible moment. What are you doing? Kator's voice cut through the static, no longer commanding, but genuinely bewildered. Learning, sir, Alara replied, as Jax piloted their signal drones directly toward the station's primary sensor array. Professor Yamamoto always said that the best education comes from practical application. The Aegis shuddered as its improvised weapon systems fired in coordination, but these weren't military-grade weapons designed to destroy. Instead, they were precision instruments repurposed for a very specific task, creating enough electronic chaos to blind the Kator installation without actually damaging it beyond repair. Captain, Lieutenant Commander Reeves called out, their main defensive grid is fluctuating. We've got a window. A window to what Captain Morrison demanded. We still can't fight them directly. We don't need to fight them, sir, Alara said, her confidence growing as her plan unfolded Exactly as she'd hoped. We just need to get inside. Inside Cadet, that's a military installation with armed guards and... Sir, permission to take a shuttle to the station to continue our educational observation. The audacity of the request left the command deck speechless. Dr. Sayre was the first to recover, and her expression was one of professional admiration. Brilliant, she murmured. Absolutely brilliant. Captain Morrison looked confused. She's maintained the fiction that this is an educational exercise, Dr. Sayre explained. Even while conducting what amounts to a successful cyber warfare attack, she's presented it as academic curiosity. Psychologically, it creates cognitive dissonance in the enemy. They know they're under attack, but they can't quite reconcile that with the narrative they've been given. General Couture's voice crackled through the communication system, and for the first time, he sounded uncertain. Cadet, what have you done to our systems? Sir, we've simply applied some academic research techniques to better understand your defensive capabilities. Our shuttle is requesting permission to dock for closer observation, as previously discussed. This was not previously discussed. Sir, you invited us to observe Couture military doctrine. We're simply requesting a more comprehensive learning experience. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Around the command deck, everyone held their breath as they waited for Couture's response. Finally, the general's voice returned, and there was something different about it. A grudging respect mixed with complete bewilderment. Cadet, I am beginning to suspect that your academic research is not as innocent as you have suggested. Sir, all learning involves a certain degree of active investigation. Indeed. Very well, Cadet. Your shuttle is cleared to dock. But I warn you, my station may be temporarily blinded, but it is far from defenseless. Understood, sir. We appreciate the continued learning opportunity. As the shuttle, Academic Inquiry, a name that Jax had suggested with barely suppressed laughter, approached the Couture station, Alara found herself reviewing everything she knew about station layouts and command structures. The Couture were militaristic and hierarchical, which meant that their command center would be heavily fortified, but also centrally located for maximum coordination efficiency. Alara, Mara said as they approached the docking bay. I have to ask, do you actually have a plan for what happens once we're inside, or are we improvising from here on out? Little of both, Alara admitted. The key is to maintain the fiction that we're students on an educational mission, even when we're doing things that are obviously not student-like. And if General Couture decides to shoot us on sight, then we'll have learned something important about Couture hospitality protocols. Dr. Sayre, who had insisted on joining the away team, chuckled softly. Alara, you have a natural talent for psychological warfare. Have you considered it as a career specialty? Right now, Doctor, I'm just trying to get through my final exam without getting everyone killed. The docking procedure went smoothly, aided by the fact that Couture's automated systems were still functioning, even though their sensor arrays were compromised. As the shuttle's airlock cycled, Alara took a deep breath and tried to project the confident curiosity of a student on a field trip, rather than the barely controlled terror of someone who was about to board an enemy military installation. The Couture officer, who met them at the airlock, was clearly struggling with the same cognitive dissonance that Dr. Sayre had described. Commander Thala was a veteran soldier, his uniform bearing the insignia of multiple campaigns, but his expression suggested that nothing in his military experience had prepared him for this situation. Cadet Voss, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Yes, sir. Thank you for accommodating our research mission. My team and I are very excited to observe Couture operational procedures firsthand. Commander Thale looked at the group of young humans in their academy uniforms, clearly trying to reconcile their innocent appearance with the fact that they had just successfully blinded his station's defensive systems, using what appeared to be student equipment. The general is waiting for you in the command center, he said finally. If you would follow me. The walk through the Couture station was simultaneously fascinating and terrifying. The corridors were utilitarian and efficient with no wasted space or unnecessary decoration. Cadet personnel moved with military precision, but Alara noticed that many of them were staring at the human visitors with expressions of curiosity and confusion. "Commander," she said as they walked, "could you explain the tactical reasoning behind your corridor layout? Our professors always emphasize the importance of interior defensive positioning." Thala glanced at her with surprise. "You're interested in defensive architecture?" "Oh, yes, sir. The integration of form and function in military installations is a key component of our strategic studies curriculum." What followed was a 10-minute impromptu lecture on Cadet-based design philosophy, during which Commander Thala unconsciously revealed details about security checkpoints, emergency protocols, and the location of critical systems. By the time they reached the command center, Alara had a fairly comprehensive understanding of the station's layout and operational procedures. General Voron Kator was exactly what Alara had expected: tall, imposing, with the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. His office overlooked the station's primary command center, where dozens of Kator officers worked at holographic displays and control interfaces. As Alara and her team entered, she could see that many of the displays were flickering or showing error messages, evidence of their successful disruption of the station's sensor network. "Cadet Voss," the general said, rising from behind his desk. "At last we meet face to face. General Kator, sir. Thank you for this incredible learning opportunity." Kator studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Tell me, Cadet, what exactly have you learned from your research thus far?" Alara took a breath, knowing that her answer could determine whether they left the station as guests or prisoners. "Sir, I've learned that Cadet defensive doctrine is even more sophisticated than our textbook suggested. The integration of multiple sensor arrays with overlapping coverage zones demonstrates a level of tactical thinking that our academy instructors will find very educational. And yet you managed to disrupt those same sensor arrays using student equipment." "Yes, sir. Though I should point out that we only succeeded because you generously allowed us to observe your systems in operation. In a true combat situation, we would never have had that opportunity." It was a diplomatic way of saying that their success had depended on Kator's cooperation, which was technically true, while also being completely misleading. General Kator seemed to recognize the subtle flattery, but also appeared grudgingly impressed by the execution. "Show me," he said suddenly. "Sir." "Show me how you did it. I want to understand these academic research techniques you employed." Alara exchanged glances with her teammates. This was the moment she'd been hoping for, and dreading in equal measure. "Sir, it would be easier to demonstrate if we had access to your primary command interface." "You want me to give you access to my command systems?" "Only for educational purposes, sir, to help illustrate the specific technical vulnerabilities we identified." The audacity of the request was breathtaking, but Alara was counting on the fact that Kator psychology valued strength and directness. By asking boldly for something outrageous, she was appealing to the general sense of professional confidence while simultaneously maintaining the fiction that this was an academic exercise. General Kator was silent for nearly a minute, his eyes moving from Alara to her teammates and back again. Finally, he gestured toward the command center. "Very well, Cadet. But you will demonstrate under close supervision, and any attempt at sabotage will result in immediate execution." "Understood, sir. We appreciate the trust you're placing in us." What happened next was perhaps the most surreal experience of Alara's life. Escorted by armed guards, and under the direct supervision of General Kator himself, she and her team took positions at the Kator command interface and began to demonstrate exactly how they had compromised the station's defenses. Mara took the lead on the technical explanation, walking the Kator officers through the process of signal spoofing and electromagnetic interference, while carefully not revealing that they had planted additional surprises in the station's systems during their initial attack. "The key insight," Mara explained, was recognizing that your point defense system's diagnostic cycle created a predictable window of vulnerability. By timing our electromagnetic pulse to coincide with that window, we could disrupt the entire defensive grid without actually damaging any of the hardware. Clever, admitted the Cadet chief technical officer. Crude but clever. Thank you, sir. Though I should mention that we also deployed a secondary protocol to ensure the disruption would be temporary and reversible. What Mara didn't mention was that her secondary protocol included a hidden subroutine that would give them administrative access to the station's computer network if activated. Alara caught her friend's eye and nodded slightly. It was time for the final phase of their plan. General, Alara said, "If you don't mind, I'd like to show you something that our tactical instructors taught us about information warfare." Before Cadet could respond, Alara's fingers moved across the command interface with practiced efficiency. The main display screen flickered, and suddenly, every monitor in the command center was showing the same message. Galactic Alliance. Academy Training. Exercise. Complete. Objective. Capture enemy. Command Center. Status mission. Accomplished. Congratulations to Cadet, Alara Voss and team. The command center erupted in confused voices as Cadet officers tried to understand what had just happened. General Cadet stared at the displays in stunned silence, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, anger, and what might have been admiration. "Cadet," he said finally, his voice very quiet, "what have you done?" "Sir," Alara replied, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. "I've completed my final examination." "Your examination?" "Yes, sir. The assignment was to demonstrate practical application of asymmetric warfare tactics in a real-world scenario. I believe we've successfully captured your command center using nothing but academic resources and psychological misdirection." The silence that followed was absolute. Every person in the command center, Cadet and human alike, was staring at Alara with expressions ranging from terror to awe. She had just calmly announced that she had taken control of a military installation as part of a school project. General Cadet was the first to recover. "You realize," he said slowly, "that this constitutes an act of war." "Sir, with respect, I disagree. We never fired a shot, never damaged your equipment, and never threatened your personnel. We simply demonstrated that your defensive systems contained vulnerabilities that could be exploited by sufficiently motivated students." "Students," Cadet repeated, as if the word tasted strange in his mouth. "Yes, sir. Students with access to academic research equipment and a thorough education in theoretical tactical principles." Dr. Sir stepped forward, her expression professional but proud. "General, if I may explain the pedagogical framework we've been operating under." "The what?" "The educational theory, sir. Cadet Voss and her team have been engaged in what we call applied learning, taking classroom concepts and testing them in real-world situations under controlled conditions." "Controlled conditions," Cadett's voice was rising. "You've taken control of my station." "Temporarily, sir," Alara interjected. "And with your permission, we'd like to return that control to you immediately, along with a complete technical briefing on the vulnerabilities we exploited and recommendations for addressing them." "You want to help us fix our defenses?" "Sir, the purpose of this exercise was never to cause lasting damage. It was to learn, and to help others learn. If we can help you improve your security protocols, then everyone benefits from the educational experience." General Cadet looked around his command center, where his officers were still staring at displays that announced their defeat at the hands of a group of students. When he spoke again, his voice held a note of incredulous respect. "Cadet Voss, in 30 years of military service, I have never encountered anything quite like this." "Sir, I hope that's a good thing." "I'm not entirely certain, but I will say this. Your instructors have trained you well." What followed was perhaps the most unusual military debriefing in the history of interstellar warfare. Alara and her team spent the next 2 hours walking the Cadet technical staff through every aspect of their improvised attack, explaining not only what they had done, but why it had worked and how similar attacks could be prevented in the future. Mara demonstrated the signal spoofing techniques they had used, while Jax explained the mathematical principles behind their timing calculations. Dr. Sir provided commentary on the psychological aspects of their approach, and Alara coordinated the overall presentation with the confidence of someone who had just realized that her final exam had become a master class in asymmetric warfare. The key insight, she explained to the assembled Cadet officers, was recognizing that your expectations about our capabilities were based on conventional military thinking. You expected us to either surrender or fight using traditional tactics. By presenting ourselves as students on an educational mission, we created a cognitive framework that made it difficult for you to recognize that we were actually conducting an attack. And the technical vulnerabilities? Asked the Cadet chief engineer. Most of them were actually features, not bugs, Mara replied. Your diagnostic cycles and sensor integration protocols are excellent for normal operations. The problem was that they created predictable patterns that could be exploited by someone with enough time to study them. Time that you gained by convincing us you were surrendering, General Couture observed. Exactly, sir. The psychological component was just as important as the technical component. By the time the briefing was complete, the Couture officers were asking detailed questions about Galactic Alliance Academy training methods and theoretical tactical frameworks. Several of them requested copies of the technical specifications for the equipment Alara's team had used, leading to an impromptu discussion about academic military cooperation and information sharing. General, Alara said as the formal briefing concluded, we should probably return to our ship now. I suspect Captain Morrison is starting to worry about us. Couture nodded slowly. Indeed, though I confess I am curious about one thing, Cadet. Sir, what grade do you expect to receive for this examination? Alara grinned. Honestly, sir, I'm hoping for extra credit. The return journey to the Aegis was considerably more relaxed than their arrival had been. Commander Thala escorted them back to their shuttle, and his demeanor had shifted from suspicious wariness to professional respect. Cadet, he said as they reached the docking bay. I've been a soldier for 15 years and I've never seen anything like what you accomplished today. Thank you, sir, though I should point out that we couldn't have done it without excellent teachers and good teammates. Nevertheless, it was educational. As their shuttle departed the Couture station, Ilara looked back at the massive installation and felt a strange mixture of pride and disbelief. They had actually done it. They had taken control of an enemy military base, using nothing but student equipment, theoretical knowledge, and a well-executed bluff. Alara, Jax said as he piloted them back toward the Aegis. Can I ask you something? Sure. When you first suggested this plan, did you actually think it would work? Alara considered the question seriously. Honestly, I thought we had maybe a 30% chance of success. And if it hadn't worked? Then we would have learned something valuable about the limitations of asymmetric warfare tactics. Mara laughed. You're saying that either way it would have been educational? Exactly. That's the beauty of treating everything as a learning experience. You can't really fail, only gather data for future reference. Dr. Sir, who had been quietly reviewing her notes from the debriefing, looked up with a smile. Cadet Voss, you've just demonstrated something that our tactical instructors have been trying to teach for decades, that the most powerful weapon in any conflict is the ability to think differently than your opponent expects. And the willingness to take risks in service of that thinking, Alara added. Indeed, though I suspect that when we return to the Academy, your risk-taking will become the subject of considerable discussion among the faculty. The Aegis came into view ahead of them, its hull scarred but intact emergency lighting, still casting an eerie glow through the observation ports. As they approached, Alara could see faces pressed against the viewports. Her fellow cadets and the ship's crew all waiting to hear what had happened during their impossible mission to the Couture station. Academic inquiry. This is Aegis Command. Captain Morrison's voice crackled through their communication system. Please report your status. Aegis. This is Cadet Voss, Alara replied. Mission accomplished, sir. Requesting permission to dock. Mission accomplished, Cadet. What exactly was your mission? Sir, we successfully captured the Kotor Command Center, obtained a complete technical briefing on their defensive systems, established cooperative academic-military relations, and negotiated the safe return of all personnel to their respective vessels. The silence that followed suggested that Captain Morrison was struggling to process this information. Finally, his voice returned, carefully controlled. Cadet Voss, please report to the command deck immediately upon docking, and bring your team. Aye, sir. As they docked with the Aegis, Alara found herself wondering what kind of reception they would receive. They had, after all, taken a training exercise and turned it into an actual military operation without authorization. On the other hand, they had succeeded in neutralizing a potentially dangerous situation and gathering valuable intelligence in the process. The answer came as soon as they stepped through the airlock. The corridor was lined with their fellow cadets, all of them applauding and cheering as Alara and her team made their way toward the command deck. Someone had improvised a banner reading, "Congratulations to the Academic Assault Team," and several people pressed forward to shake their hands and ask questions about their experience. Voss called out Cadet Martinez from their Advanced Tactics class. Is it true you actually took over their command center? We prefer to think of it as a successful collaborative learning experience, Alara replied diplomatically. The celebration was interrupted by Lieutenant Commander Reeves, who appeared at the end of the corridor, looking both impressed and exasperated. Cadets, the captain is waiting, she said. And I should warn you, there are going to be some very interesting conversations about this incident when we return to the academy. As they entered the command deck, Alara was surprised to find that the entire senior staff was present, along with several instructors she hadn't expected to see. Captain Morrison stood at the center of the group, his expression unreadable. Cadet Voss, he said formally, please give me your complete report on the events of the past 4 hours. What followed was the most comprehensive debriefing of Alara's life. She walked the assembled officers through every aspect of their plan, from the initial analysis of Kotor defensive vulnerabilities to the final negotiation of their safe return. Her teammates contributed technical details and psychological insights, while Dr. Sir provided professional commentary on the pedagogical implications of their approach. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Captain Morrison said when they had finished. You identified a gap in enemy defenses, developed an improvised weapons system, using academic equipment, conducted a successful cyber warfare attack, under the guise of surrender negotiations, boarded an enemy installation, took control of their command center, and then provided them with a complete technical briefing on how to prevent similar attacks in the future. That's essentially correct, sir. And you did all of this as part of a final examination? Yes, sir. Though I should point out that the examination parameters were somewhat flexible. Captain Morrison looked at the other officers, several of whom were struggling to maintain professional composure. Professor Chen, from the Strategy Department, was taking detailed notes, while Commander Williams from the Engineering Corps was reviewing Mara's technical specifications with obvious interest. Cadet Voss. Captain Morrison said finally, what you accomplished today was either the most brilliant tactical innovation I've seen in 20 years of service, or the most reckless violation of military protocol in the history of the Academy. Sir, I'm hoping it's the first thing. So am I, Cadet, so am I. The formal debriefing continued for another hour, as various instructors asked detailed questions about different aspects of their operation. Professor Yamamoto participated via holographic transmission from the Academy, and his expression suggested a mixture of pride and concern as he questioned Alara about her application of asymmetric warfare principles. Cadet, he said, when I taught you about thinking outside conventional parameters, I didn't necessarily expect you to apply those lessons quite so literally. Sir, you always said that theory without practice is just philosophy. Indeed I did. And practice without theory is just chaos. You appear to have found an effective balance between the two. As the debriefing concluded, Captain Morrison called for a private conference with Alara and her immediate team. When the command deck had cleared of other personnel, he turned to face them with an expression of serious consideration. Cadets, I want you to understand the implications of what you've accomplished today. You've demonstrated that a small group of motivated students can successfully challenge military installations using improvised tactics and academic resources. That's either a testament to the quality of academy training or a serious indictment of military security protocols. Sir, Alara said carefully, I think it's probably both. Explain. The Academy taught us to think creatively about tactical problems and to use whatever resources were available to achieve our objectives. But the Cadet installation was vulnerable because they weren't expecting an academic approach to warfare. In a sense, both sides learned something important today. Captain Morrison nodded slowly. And what do you think the long-term implications of that learning might be? Dr. Sir answered, before Alara could respond. Captain, if I may, I think what we've seen today represents a new paradigm in asymmetric warfare. The traditional boundaries between military and academic institutions are becoming increasingly irrelevant in an era where information and innovation are just as important as firepower. You're suggesting that students should be considered military assets. I'm suggesting that the distinction between students and soldiers may be less meaningful than we've traditionally assumed. Cadet Voss and her team demonstrated today that with proper education and motivation, civilians can accomplish military objectives that would be difficult or impossible for conventional forces. Captain Morrison was quiet for a long moment considering the implications. When he spoke again, his voice held a note of profound respect. Cadets, you've given us all a great deal to think about. Your actions today will undoubtedly become the subject of extensive analysis and discussion at the highest levels of military and academic leadership. Sir, Alara said, does that mean we're in trouble? Cadet, I honestly don't know. What you did was unprecedented, and I'm not sure anyone knows quite how to categorize it. But I will say this. You've demonstrated exactly the kind of innovative thinking and tactical creativity that the Alliance needs in an era of rapidly evolving threats. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, Cadet. You still have to defend your actions to the Academy Review Board when we return to base. The journey back to the Academy took 3 days, during which Alara and her team found themselves the center of constant attention from their fellow cadets and instructors. News of their successful operation had spread throughout the ship, and everyone wanted to hear first-hand accounts of how they had captured a Cadet military installation. The hardest part, Mara explained to a group of fascinated engineering students, was maintaining the fiction that we were just conducting academic research while actually deploying military-grade countermeasures. But how did you know it would work? Asked Cadet Rodriguez. We didn't, Alara admitted. That's why it was such a good learning experience. We had to adapt our plans constantly based on new information and changing circumstances. Jax had become something of a celebrity among the pilot corps and spent hours explaining the mathematical principles behind their timing calculations and drone coordination. The key insight, he told his audience, was recognizing that precision timing could compensate for our lack of overwhelming firepower. Dr. Sir, meanwhile, had been conducting informal seminars on the psychological aspects of their approach, drawing enthusiastic audiences of cadets interested in information warfare and psychological operations. The human mind naturally seeks to categorize and understand new information within existing frameworks, she explained. By presenting ourselves as students, rather than threats, we made it psychologically difficult for the Cadet to recognize that they were under attack until it was too late to respond effectively. As the Aegis approached the Academy space station, Ilara found herself both excited and nervous about the reception they would receive. Their operation had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, but it had also challenged fundamental assumptions about military doctrine and academic boundaries. Ilara, Captain Morrison called her to his ready room on their final day of travel. "I wanted to speak with you privately before we arrive." "Yes, sir." "The Academy Review Board has scheduled a formal hearing for tomorrow morning. You'll be required to present a complete analysis of your operation, including tactical justification, risk assessment, and long-term implications." "Sir, is this a disciplinary hearing?" "Honestly, Cadet, I don't think anyone knows. What you accomplished is so far outside normal parameters that there's no established protocol for dealing with it." Alara nodded, trying to process the implications. "Sir, do you think we made the right choice?" Captain Morrison was quiet for a moment, looking out at the stars through his ready room viewport. "Cadet, in my experience, the right choice is usually the one that achieves your objectives while minimizing harm to others. By that standard, you succeeded admirably. But you also set a precedent that could have far-reaching consequences for military-academic relations. The question isn't whether you made the right choice in this specific situation. It's whether your approach can be systematically applied without creating unacceptable risks." "I understand, sir." "I hope you do, Cadet, because I suspect that your presentation tomorrow will influence Academy policy for decades to come." The Academy space station was a magnificent sight as they approached its rotating sections, gleaming in the light of the system's binary stars. Alara had called this place home for 2 years, but returning now felt different somehow. She was no longer just a student completing her education. She was someone who had applied that education in ways that challenged the fundamental assumptions of both military and academic institutions. The docking procedures were routine, but the reception was anything but. As soon as they disembarked, Ilara and her team found themselves surrounded by Academy officials, military liaison officers, and what appeared to be several representatives from the Alliance High Command. Admiral Rebecca Sterling, the Academy Commandant, stepped forward with an expression that managed to convey both pride and concern. "Cadet Voss, welcome back. I trust your final training cruise was educational." "Yes, ma'am, very much so." "Indeed. I look forward to hearing your complete report tomorrow morning. In the meantime, you and your team are restricted to Academy quarters, pending the review board hearing." "Understood, ma'am." As they were escorted to their dormitory section, Ilara caught glimpses of other cadets watching them, with expressions ranging from awe to envy. Word of their operation had clearly preceded their arrival, and she realized that their actions had already begun to influence Academy culture in ways she hadn't anticipated. That evening, as she prepared for the review board hearing, Ilara reflected on the chain of events that had led to this moment. 3 months ago, she had been a typical second-year cadet, focused on completing her coursework and preparing for graduation. Now, she was preparing to defend actions that had captured an enemy military installation and challenged decades of established doctrine. "Are you nervous?" Mara asked, as they reviewed their presentation materials one final time. "Terrified," Alara admitted, "but also excited. This is what we trained for. The opportunity to apply our education in service of something larger than ourselves. Even if we get expelled. Though I really hope we don't get expelled." Dr. Sir, who had been working on the psychological analysis section of their presentation, looked up from her notes with a thoughtful expression. "You know, regardless of what happens tomorrow, you've already succeeded in the most important way." "How so?" "You've demonstrated that education and action aren't separate activities. They're different aspects of the same process. That's a lesson that will outlast any specific policy decisions or disciplinary actions." The review board hearing was held in the Academy's main conference center, with representatives from military command, academic administration, and civilian oversight agencies. Alara and her team took their places at the presentation podium, facing a panel of senior officers and professors who would determine not just their academic fate, but potentially the future direction of Alliance military education. Admiral Sterling called the hearing to order with formal precision. This review board is convened to examine the actions of Cadet Alara Voss and her team during their final training cruise aboard the vessel Aegis. Cadet Voss, you have 1 hour to present your complete analysis and justification for your operation. Thank you, Admiral. Alara stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. Honorable members of the review board, 3 days ago, my team and I found ourselves in a situation that required us to apply everything we had learned during our time at the Academy. What we accomplished was not just a successful tactical operation, but a demonstration of the principles that this institution has taught us, that knowledge without action is incomplete, that creativity and adaptability are force multipliers, and that the greatest victories come not from overwhelming strength, but from understanding your enemy better than they understand themselves. What followed was the most comprehensive presentation of Alara's life. She walked the board through every aspect of their operation, from initial tactical analysis to final debriefing with Couture personnel. Mara demonstrated the technical innovations they had employed, while Jax presented the mathematical models that had made their timing possible. Dr. Ser provided psychological analysis of their approach, explaining how they had used cognitive frameworks and expectation management to achieve tactical surprise. The key insight, Alara explained, as she concluded her presentation, was recognizing that our status as students was not a limitation to be overcome, but an asset to be leveraged. The Couture expected us to behave like soldiers, which made it possible for us to succeed by behaving like scholars. Scholars who captured a military installation observed General Harrison from the Military Liaison Office. Yes, sir. Scholars who applied their education to achieve a military objective without firing a shot or causing permanent damage to enemy personnel or equipment. The questioning that followed was intense and detailed. Board members challenged every aspect of their operation, from the ethical implications of their deception to the precedent-setting nature of their success. Professor Williams from the Ethics Department was particularly pointed in her questions about the use of educational resources for military purposes. Cadet Voss, she said, how do you justify turning academic equipment into weapon systems? Professor, with respect, we didn't turn our equipment into weapons. We used our equipment for its intended purpose, research and analysis. The fact that this research had military applications doesn't change its fundamental nature. But you clearly intended to use that research to neutralize enemy defenses. Yes, ma'am. Just as a historian might use archival research to understand enemy motivations, or a physicist might use theoretical knowledge to develop new technologies. The application of knowledge is inherent in education itself. Admiral Chen from the Strategic Planning Division leaned forward with obvious interest. Cadet, do you believe that your approach could be systematically taught and applied by other students? Sir, I believe that the principles we used, adaptive thinking, resource optimization, psychological analysis, and team coordination, are already being taught at the Academy. What we did was demonstrate that these principles can be effectively applied in real-world situations. And the risks of that application? Sir, any application of knowledge involves risk. The question is whether the potential benefits outweigh those risks, and whether proper safeguards can be developed to minimize negative outcomes. The hearing continued for nearly 3 hours, covering every aspect of their operation and its implications. By the time Admiral Sterling called for recess, so that the board could deliberate, Alara felt as though she had been thoroughly dissected and analyzed from every possible angle. How do you think it went? Jax asked, as they waited in an adjacent conference room. I think we presented our case as well as we could, Alara replied. The rest is out of our hands. Dr. Ser nodded thoughtfully. Regardless of their decision, you should all be proud of what you've accomplished. You've forced the Academy to confront some fundamental questions about the nature of education and its relationship to practical application. And hopefully, we've done it in a way that will benefit future students, Mara added. When they were called back into the hearing room an hour later, Admiral Sterling's expression was carefully neutral. The board members had arranged themselves in formal positions, and Alara felt a moment of pure terror as she realized that her entire future might be determined by the next few minutes. Cadet Voss, Admiral Sterling, began, "The review board has reached its decision regarding your actions during the recent training cruise." "Yes, ma'am." "After extensive deliberation, we have concluded that your operation, while unprecedented and technically outside established protocols, represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking and practical application of knowledge that the Academy seeks to foster in its graduates." Alara felt her knees nearly buckle with relief, but Admiral Sterling wasn't finished. "However, we also recognize that your actions raise important questions about military academic boundaries and the appropriate use of educational resources. Therefore, we are implementing the following decisions. First, Cadet Voss and her team will receive full academic credit for their operation, which will be classified as a successful completion of their Advanced Applied Tactics final examination. Second, the technical innovations and tactical approaches employed during this operation will become the subject of intensive study and potential integration into Academy curriculum. Third, a new joint military academic working group will be established to develop guidelines for future operations that blur the traditional boundaries between educational and military activities. And fourth, Cadet Voss will be offered the opportunity to remain at the Academy as a graduate research assistant, working with faculty to develop new approaches to asymmetric warfare education. Alara stared at the Admiral, trying to process what she had just heard. Not only were they not being expelled, they were being offered positions to help shape the future of military education. "Admiral," she said carefully, "are you saying that we've been accepted into the graduate program?" "Cadet, I'm saying that you've created a graduate program. The question is whether you're willing to help us figure out how it should work." The celebration that followed was unlike anything in Academy history. Word of the review board's decision spread rapidly through the station, and within hours, Alara and her team found themselves the center of an impromptu festival that drew cadets, faculty, and staff from across the Academy. "To the academic assault team," someone shouted, raising a glass of synthetic champagne. "To thinking outside the box," called another voice. "To proving that students can change the world." As the celebration continued around her, Alara found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. 3 days ago, she had been a cadet, facing what seemed like an impossible situation. Now, she was a graduate researcher with the opportunity to help reshape military education for future generations. Alara. Professor Yamamoto approached with a smile that mixed pride with amazement. "I have to ask, when you were sitting in my asymmetric warfare class, did you ever imagine that you would apply the lessons quite so dramatically?" "Honestly, Professor, I was just trying to pass the final exam." "Well, I think it's safe to say that you exceeded expectations." Captain Morrison, who had arrived for the celebration despite his exhaustion from the journey, raised his glass in a toast. "To Cadet Voss and her team, who reminded us all that the most powerful weapon in any arsenal is a well-educated mind willing to take risks in service of a greater cause." As the evening wore on, Alara found herself surrounded by fellow students, eager to hear about her experience and to understand how they might apply similar approaches to their own studies. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a priority message from the Alliance High Command. Admiral Sterling read the message aloud to the assembled crowd. "The Alliance Strategic Council has reviewed the Academy Review Board's report on the Cadet operation. Based on the innovative tactical approaches demonstrated by Cadet Voss and her team, the Council is authorizing the establishment of a new Advanced Applied Warfare Research Institute to be based at the Academy and focused on developing unconventional approaches to military challenges. Cadet Voss is hereby invited to serve as the Institute's first Director of Student Operations." The crowd erupted in cheers, but Alara felt a moment of overwhelming responsibility. She was being offered the chance to influence military strategy at the highest levels, all because she had refused to surrender when surrender seemed like the only option. Later that evening, As the celebration finally wound down, Ilara stood on the Academy's observation deck, looking out at the stars. Mara joined her, followed by Jax and Dr. Sir, and they stood together in comfortable silence as they contemplated their extraordinary journey. "So," Mara said finally, "what do we do next?" "We learn," Ilara replied. "We teach. We figure out how to help other students discover that they're capable of more than they ever imagined. And hopefully, we don't accidentally start any more wars in the process," Jax added with a grin. Dr. Sir chuckled. "I think the key will be helping people understand that education and action aren't opposing forces. They're complementary aspects of human development. Plus," Ilara said, "we've proven that sometimes the best way to win a war is to turn it into a learning experience." As they watched the stars, Ilara thought about the message they would receive from General Couture the next morning. A formal invitation to visit the Couture Academy for a series of joint seminars on tactical innovation and military academic cooperation. The operation that had begun as a desperate improvisation had opened doors to possibilities that none of them could have imagined. "You know," she said to her friends, "I think our real final exam is just beginning." In the weeks that followed, as news of their operation spread throughout Alliance space, Ilara and her team would find themselves at the center of a transformation in military thinking that would influence strategic doctrine for generations. The incident would become known as the Academic Victory and would be studied in military academies and civilian universities alike as an example of how unconventional thinking could overcome seemingly impossible odds. But that night, as they stood together looking out at the infinite possibilities of space, they were simply four friends who had learned that sometimes the most important lesson is the willingness to rewrite the rules when the situation demands it. They had been told to surrender, and instead, they had captured victory itself, not through force of arms, but through the power of educated minds working together toward a common goal. The human cadet had been told to surrender. Instead, she had captured something far more valuable than an enemy base. She had captured the future.